Let's just jump right in, shall we? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a fascinating research paper that dives into what is honestly one of the most profound shifts happening in modern science right now, the psychedelic renaissance. For decades, substances like psilocybin and LSD were just completely locked away. They were written off by the scientific establishment. But today, they're literally at the absolute cutting edge of psychiatric research. We're going to keep things strictly to the facts and demystify the actual complex neurobiology behind psychedelics so we can understand exactly how they're revolutionizing mental health research. It is a true story of mystery, mechanism, and medicine.
But, to understand where we are today, we really have to look at where we started. And you might be surprised by this. Back in the 1950s and 60s, a whopping 40,000 subjects participated in early psychedelic research. Scientists published over 1,000 papers reporting some really impressive improvement rates for patients struggling with things like depression, anxiety, and alcohol dependence. This wasn't some fringe underground science. It was a massive global effort to understand the human mind. But then, almost overnight, the science was abruptly halted.
The timeline of this whole journey is just a wild ride. We go from that massive 1950s global research boom right into a brick wall, the 1970s Schedule I total ban. This triggered a 50-year legal blackout. Nothing could be studied. It really wasn't until the 1990s, when scientists were armed with advanced brain scanning technology, that they could finally peek inside the living brain and spark a real scientific revival. And that brings us to today, where breakthrough clinical trials are making headlines all over again.
So, Section 1, Brain Receptors, Unlocking the Mind. Let's look at how these substances actually work on a biological level.
Okay. The absolute crucial point here is that classic psychedelics aren't just doing things randomly. They don't just flood your brain with chaos. Instead, they act like highly specialized keys unlocking a very specific neural doorway. And that doorway is called the 5-HT2A receptor. It's a type of serotonin receptor that is heavily concentrated right in your prefrontal cortex. The area of your brain responsible for high-level thinking and processing. When researchers block the specific receptor in the lab, the psychedelic effects completely vanish. No trip whatsoever. This receptor is the primary trigger for literally everything that follows.
And here's what happens when that trigger is actually pulled. Imagine a part of your brain called the thalamus is basically a bouncer at a club. In a normal, everyday brain, that thalamus acts as a really strict sensory filter. It carefully controls the flow of information from the outside world so you don't get totally overwhelmed. But in the psychedelic brain, that bouncer takes a coffee break. This is known in the research as reduced thalamic gating. Without that strict filter, a massive, vibrant flood of internal and external sensory data reaches your cortex. This is exactly what explains the intense colors, the altered sounds, and those vivid, rushing memories people experience. Moving right along to Section 2, neuroplasticity and how we're actually rewiring the brain. To understand the lasting benefits reported in these modern studies, we have to talk about neuroplasticity. What is it? Well, it's essentially the brain's incredible capacity to heal, adapt, and physically rewire itself. For a really long time, scientists thought adult brains were mostly fixed, like concrete. But now we know the brain can actually form new connections, very much like branches growing on a tree, which helps us adapt to new situations or recover from severe trauma. In psychedelics, they absolutely supercharge that process. Animal studies highlighted in the research show that these substances act almost like fertilizer for the mind. They stimulate the release of something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially a growth protein. This promotes the rapid growth of new synaptic connections and enhances communication between your neurons using a chemical called glutamate. But here is the kicker for therapy. This physical rewiring actually helps the brain unlearn deeply conditioned fear memories. This physical rewiring perfectly sets the stage for Section 3, dissolving the ego and the default mode network. We all have this network in our brain called the default mode network, or DMN. Think of it as your brain's rigid internal autopilot. It's highly active when we're daydreaming, worrying about the future, or obsessing over our own self-image. In conditions like depression, the DMN is essentially overactive. People get trapped in these exhausting negative loops. But under the influence of psychedelics, the DMN quiets right down. Its rigid integrity just decreases. This creates what researchers call a relaxed brain state. It allows for highly flexible thinking where the strict boundaries between self and the outside world seem to completely dissolve. At the exact same time, brain scans are showing incredible changes in the amygdala, which is the brain's main fear center.
Look at this data. In a normal depressed state, amygdala reactivity to negative emotions is incredibly high. It's essentially on red alert. But during the acute psychedelic state, that reactivity drops sharply. And beautifully, in the post-therapy state, it remains reduced. This means that the intense negative bias and that endless rumination often seen in major depression are effectively turned down. It allows patients to actually inspect their emotions without severe judgment or crippling fear.
Which brings us to Section 4, the future of therapy and its clinical applications. How does all this microscopic neurobiology translate into real, tangible medicine? Well, first, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this is not just taking a drug and hoping for the best. The clinical process is a highly structured, scientifically rigorous therapy. It happens in 3 distinct steps. First, intensive preparation, where the patient builds deep trust with a therapist. Second, the supervised session itself, usually lasting several hours in a very comfortable, safe setting. And third, and perhaps the most important part, post-experience integration. This is where the patient works with their therapist to make sense of the profound thoughts and emotions they just experienced so they can actually apply them to their daily life. And the factual outcomes from these modern double-blind clinical trials, they are truly astonishing. For treatment-resistant depression, meaning patients who haven't responded to any other medication, studies show rapid symptom reduction lasting up to 6 whole months from just 1 or 2 doses. For patients facing life-threatening cancer anxiety, trials are recording sustained decreases in anxiety enduring up to a full year. And for severe tobacco and alcohol addiction, these therapies are helping reinstate a sense of social reward, leading to significant, lasting reductions in substance use. If you or a loved one have ever watched someone struggle with these conditions, you know exactly why these long-term results are a total game changer. Perhaps the most fascinating finding is this insight straight from the research. It says, positively experienced self-dissolution associated with feelings of oneness has been shown to be positively correlated with treatment success. Let's translate that into plain English. It means the scientific data actually proves that these profound, mystical-type experiences, that incredible feeling of being entirely connected to the universe and losing your rigid ego, are actually the strongest biological predictors of a patient's long-term recovery. The psychological experience itself is the medicine. Furthermore, this whole neurobiological reset dramatically improves how we process social information. The data shows patients experience increased emotional empathy, the ability to genuinely feel with other people. They show reduced sensitivity to social rejection, enhanced interpersonal closeness, and a massive shift away from that destructive self-focus. This is huge. It helps patients break free from the terrible isolation of mental illness, allowing them to genuinely reconnect with their therapists, their loved ones, and society as a whole. So, as we continue to safely and scientifically unlock the mysteries of the human brain, we really have to ask ourselves this question. Could the revolutionary tools needed to heal the modern mind be the exact same ones we banned decades ago? The data from this research paper strongly suggests they just might be. But of course, science is an ongoing journey. If you found this explainer helpful, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might find it fascinating. Keep an open, fact-based mind as this remarkable field of medicine evolves, and I'll see you next time.